All right. We are successfully live. So thank you all for joining. I'm really glad to have back here with us David and Evan. So for today's session, just a quick note for our audience who's out there. This is rescheduled from last week. So thank you so much for those who kind of dealt with our technical issues. We are back and at it, and we have a really, really good discussion here for you today. So the topic is something that we don't typically talk about, but I think is extremely interesting and will kind of illuminate some of the different challenges that come into various building designs, which is how to successfully launch your cannabis facility. So we have David with Grow America here with us to talk about it, as well as Evan, which I'll turn it over to you guys to give an intro to yourselves. But first, I'll start off with David. So, David, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the industry.
Great. Thanks so much. This is great. Looking forward to it. So I was previously an attorney, zoning attorney, and I also ran a family construction company. So both for about over 20 years. Um, Always kind of, continued consuming cannabis, knew that it was going to eventually, take over as an industry. And when it was about to become adult use in Illinois, I tried actually to get a license. That was a no-go. Very expensive in Illinois at that point. But I'm like, you know what? I know how to get entitlements. I know how to design. I could build almost anything. So created Grow America with my partner to become a true like a one-stop shop for any facility, really construction needs, right? And since then, we started off small, doing dispensaries. We got very lucky with a few big MSOs such as Verano taking a shot with us.
Mhm.
And that was in 2018. We have since built probably close to 200 facilities in 20 states. Just started our 20th state now. And I currently serve on the National Cannabis Industry Association, NCIA's Facility Design Committee. I'm also a member of the Rolling Stone Culture Council, and I also sit on my local town planning commission board, which is a great education since I go, from board to board all over the country, trying to help with our zoning approvals and our entitlements and whatnot. So, we build everything from again small dispensaries, large flagship dispensaries, large scale
Mhm.
cultivation, micro grows, and anything in between as long as it's cannabis. So I think we're the only national design build firm that exclusively works in the cannabis industry. So great to
Yeah,
be here, though. Thank you.
amazing. In 20 countries, and just for our audience, like a big thank you to David for taking this call from the airport. You're definitely jet setting between all the 20 states, I guess, that you're going back and forth between. So great to have you here.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, awesome. So now let's go to Evan. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, what you're working on, and how you got into cannabis facility design. Mhm. Amazing. Yeah. So it's so interesting. I've been in the industry myself for a pretty good chunk of time, and never once has specific facility design for like cannabis, facilities has come up on my radar until now. So I'm really looking forward to learning some new stuff here. So I'll turn it back to David. Like, let's go maybe a little bit deeper. So we kind of got the high level view of Grow America, but tell us a little bit more. So, what's the main goal? I also am getting some comments. So thank you all for commenting that Evan's audio is not quite coming through. We'll see if we can fix that. He does have a really good intro, so we'll circle back once we fix that. But David, yeah, tell us a little bit more about Grow America.
So, I mean, it sounds cheesy, but we want to keep growing, right? That's the name. But I feel like we're just so early on, right? Maybe the fourth inning of the industry, and to be part of like an emerging industry like this, where we're just scratching the surface. I mean, we are, very hopeful that there's going to be some rescheduling news coming down. Again, we've been hoping that for years, but right now, obviously, cannabis is still federally a Schedule One. Hopefully it gets to Schedule 3, fairly soon, and that can open some things up. A lot of states are still medical only, Florida being one of them, which is where I am right now. That may go up to adult use. So, we see a lot of cannabis in the news, and you see, a lot of states maybe be oversaturated, but there's still a lot of states that are just opening up, right? Like Minnesota, it just went open. They're starting to launch their new facilities. A state like Alabama, Georgia, a lot of the southern states, many people don't know, are medical now. But again, what's on the horizon? Maybe adult use. So, we just want to kind of grow with the industry. We're still, quite a small company. We're not a giant company, but for what we've done and what we've accomplished, we're still kind of able to be within that niche, able to be nimble enough. So, yeah, I mean, on the horizon is just, again, we just started our 20th state, maybe 21, 22 is, around the corner. And again, there's still so much opportunity, not just for us, but for anybody in the industry, because again, we're just early on here. This is just the early innings of a great emerging industry.
Okay, great. So thanks for that, David. Evan, give it a try. Maybe say something. Let's see if
Yeah, we sounded better here. Hopefully.
hopefully give a very brief intro again, just so they can kind of hear a little bit of what you do.
Yeah, no problem. So, right, my company primarily we do architectural design and MEP engineering. Um, Kind of founded it, like I was saying, sort of a unexpected happy accident. I was working at a small company in LA, a design build firm, and we happened to get this cannabis lab project in Oakland. And through the course of working on that, just realized all the opportunity in that market space and realized that there wasn't a lot of folks that were really diving into how do you design and permit specifically these manufacturing facilities that have a
Mhm.
lot of volatile solvents in use, things that um, you know building departments are very particular about to make sure meeting those standards to get approved. So based on working on that project, continuing to build my connections in the industry, I was able to get this company going, and we've been doing it for about 7 years now. So
Beautiful. And we have
yeah,
a confirmation. You're loud and clear, so we are good.
Yes,
Um,
Evan.
yes.
there we
So we're
go.
gonna
Gonna
keep this
be a problem
going.
solver, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Excellent.
Evan and I work together. I mean, Evan's firm is phenomenal. Evan is, I mean, we do a lot of crossover between us actually. So we have a project comes our way, we need a design on it, and it's been a real seamless transition between both of our firms. It's been nice. So I think he's being a little bit humble on on what he does and how good he does it. So I'll give him a little props on that.
Okay.
Nice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of topics, but we're getting some really great engagement in the comments. So thank you all for dropping your questions and comments. And just a quick note to the audience in general, and if you're just joining us, please do use that comment box to chat, ask questions. There's a wealth of knowledge here that we have from both of our panelists. So please do use that. Even if we're not able to get to all of your questions, we will see them after. So please do use that pretty liberally to, let us know what you're wondering. So I do want to bring up one question, which was prompted, pretty early on in the discussion from Rex. So thank you for sending this in. So how do you evolve in this space without mandatory standards? Which is a really good question, right? So very curious to hear, and feel free to jump in, whoever wants to take it first.
Well, a lot of the standards come usually from the operator, right? They have their standard procedures of how they want to operate, how they want to set the facility. Evan knows when it sets up the design. One of the first questions is, who's your director of operations? What's your methodology? From a construction standpoint, we have multiple departments that have to take inspections from. So we have Department of Health when it's a edible type factory. We're going to have GMP compliance. We're going to have local building department. We'll usually have state, and then the Office of Cannabis Management. So we have, every state has different regulations. Some states, like Montana, was one inspector comes out and inspects it. other states like Florida, New York have a lot more regulations. So no, it's just doing our homework, making sure we know, which regulations we have to follow, because again, it's different from state to state, and then really depending on the operator to give us their internal standard operating procedures on how they want their facility set up.
Okay. Evan, anything to add to that?
For sure, I agree. It's. I think at this point in the industry, it's very much a personal thing, right? Yeah, I mean, if you have a head grower in place for your cultivation facility, they'll often have preferences on how things are laid out, SOPs, certain types of equipment. But I think it's also about being anticipatory, right? I mean, if you could look ahead, speculate
Hmm.
about the future with federal legalization, I mean, most likely there'll be some level of GMP, which is good manufacturing practice standards, that will need to be implemented, universally in all 50 states, right? So just kind of depends on how much you're willing to invest in getting that higher level of quality and standards right out the gate.
Yeah, I like what you mentioned too about like anticipating and, trying to see where it's going, right? So, in any industry, I think evolves over time, right? So it's always good practice to kind of keep an eye on those things. Good question. So thanks, Rex. So let's move on now. So for me, I was mentioning, at the start of this conversation, like, yeah, I've been in the industry a bit. Like, I've never really encountered discussion around cannabis facilities, but there are a lot of other similar facilities out there that we design and build all the time, right? So let's talk a little bit about, what we might be already a bit more familiar with, potentially for those in the AEC crowd there. So yeah, what types of buildings or other facilities are similar? How does it compare? And yeah, what are maybe some similarities, differences?
Well, on the retail side, right, I always say it's a cross between a jewelry store, a bank, and take any retail, right, a Gap, or any store you
Hmm.
go into, because of the security measurements. You want it to have a nice concept on the retail. I'm sure Evan could talk about the design aspect of it. And on the cultivation, I mean, we this may sound weird, but we kind of compare it to a data center because of all the HVAC.
Huh.
How you have to pull out the humidification of the plants. You have to make sure that everything's dialed in almost exact levels for temperature, humidity. All the controls are very important. There's a lot of heat that the plants produce, and so yeah, kind of data centers is what we kind of compare it to on the heating and air conditioning and cooling aspect of it. But I always say, like, hey, it's a factory, right? We're building a factory. The
Hmm.
widget happens to be cannabis. We
Hmm.
want it to be efficient, right? We don't want to just build narrow-minded, not thinking of your employees and how they're going to be working in the facility. You still have to make money. You have to make good margin, especially in today's age where it's super competitive. So that's kind of how we compare, right? Cultivation is more on a data center type. Retails like across from a bank and a jewelry store, and then on the manufacturing or doing edibles, it's a commercial kitchen that has to be up to the highest standards with a little bit extra security.
A little bit of everything in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Evan, what other observations do you have as well?
Sure. Yeah, I think David's spot on about that in terms of. And funny enough, we've actually tried to look into. I mean, might there be some opportunities for us to work in the data center design space, right? Because there's
Yeah.
so many overlaps in how you would design and the systems and everything.
Mm-hmm.
One thing to note too is, I mean, there's kind of this divide, let's say, between agricultural greenhouse type buildings, even from the building code standpoint. Those are typically classified as a U occupancy, utility occupancy, which is a much less stringent type of code parameter. The
Hmm.
maximum areas, the fire protection required is much lower. So with a lot of these big greenhouse type structures for cannabis, they're really indistinguishable from, let's say, like growing commercial lettuce or any other types of vegetables. But specifically the full indoor grow, right, where it's all artificial lighting, usually in an urban or suburban area, warehouse type building. Um, yeah, it's almost like it's literally classified as an F1 factory occupancy in the building code. So it's basically a factory, right?
they're,
All
they're
right.
such unicorns. And, I know we're trying to compare them to something, but they really are unicorns because,
Yeah.
what they're producing on the cultivation side, lettuce is not going for $3,500 a pound, right? And so, you're building these things like a fortress too, right? So that nobody can break into them, and so that they're full of surveillance. A lot of that's state mandated. But I mean, a lot of times these cultivation or manufacturing are a little bit of a unicorn as far as the design and construction aspect.
Yeah, I like that. I guess comparison to the unicorn, right? So it's kind of like it's pulling all this different parts and pieces from all these elements of building design into one, and it's this weird synthesized thing that we haven't really
Hmm.
seen before. So yeah, it's the mythical beast of facilities,
Yes.
if you will. So this is really, really good. I want to maybe segue a little bit. So with all those different types of parts and pieces, we're getting something that's, it's a little different, it's special. There's got to be some really special challenges that come along with that, right? I'm sure there's some horror stories and some, maybe lessons learned that have come along the way. So I just want to, ask both of you, is there anything that you want to share in particular about some of the challenges that you guys have gone through with the process of, building the facilities?
I mean, I've got a bucket full of horror stories and challenges, but um, you know, I'd say some of them is they're so unique. We're in a newly launched state. A lot of times when cannabis is coming in, it's, oh my gosh, what's coming in here, right? Is it going to smell? Is it going to be a security risk? What's going on? And so you have a lot of local input, whether or not the facility can be approved. We had a project where it was going to be a super high profile project, right downtown Chicago near the
Mhm.
museums and the stadiums. And it was within the buffer, right? You have to have a buffer zone between a school, a house of worship, a park, etc. Um, we got our preliminary approvals. It still had to go to ZBA, but that was going to be a rubber stamp because we had all the approvals in place. And then we got a letter from the Archdiocese of Chicago saying they don't want it there. It was too close to a school. Now, it was still within our buffer zone, right? But it was
Mm,
too close to a school. We were literally starting within 3 days. Client had put a lot of money into the
mhm.
design and pre-con, and project died, right? Because
Wow.
the public scrutiny of a project, because it's
Yeah,
cannabis.
very important.
Um,
Hmm.
and we also see this with like mortgagee clauses. Sometimes clients or their legal team don't do the due diligence. And we'd started a project. We were 4 weeks in, and the landlord. We actually got the call from the client, but they got a frantic call from the landlord. His mortgage does not allow cannabis facilities, and they were going to pull the mortgage. And he's like, "We have to stop. We got to pull everything out." And so, again, that was a mess to be untangled. We just happened to be downstream of it, but that was a project that died, and it all goes to zoning, it goes to pre-approvals, it goes to community approvals. Once you start, the challenges are obviously getting all the inspections and figuring out, oh, this state does it different than this state. But as far as the horror stories, it usually comes from those pre-approvals and not knowing what's in the mortgagee clause, or having a school still out of the buffer zone, but you have enough people that complain, and the town will pull it. So
Yeah, it's like that. You don't know what you don't know until you
that's what I
discover
always tell
something.
people. They say, well,
Yeah,
why should we work with somebody that's a specialist in this, as opposed to my friend or my brother-in-law who's a builder or who's an architect? And I would say, well, it's a matter you don't know what you don't know. When we first started, we didn't know anything, right? Our learning curve was straight up.
skyrocketed.
Evan, I'm sure too, but it is what you don't know can hurt you in this
Yeah,
industry, especially.
100%. So yeah, Evan, same question. Like, challenges, horror stories. What have you come up against?
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree with that. I think it's the reality is it's even if there are certain processes or reviews that you need to go through, additional hurdles that you're going to encounter, if you can at least be aware of those, you can price it into the budget, you can factor it into the project
Hmm.
schedule. I was speaking to somebody yesterday that's looking to do a ground up facility out in Adelanto, California, which is high desert. And that was like the red hot spot about 3 or 4 years ago. Everybody and their brother was, building an indoor grow out there. So I hadn't even heard the name Adelanto in a couple of years. But we did a number of projects out there, 2020, 2021. So I was talking to him about it. They've already acquired the land, but right out the gate, there was a few things they hadn't thought about. I mean, the big one I think of is CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act. So I mean, every ground up project that you do in the state of California, you have to do this report to, number one, determine if they need to do a more in-depth analysis of the environmental impact. But this is something that can cost thousands and thousands of dollars, and it can,
Right.
timeline of the planning clearance level months, right? And it's probably something you want to be privy of before you actually purchase the property. What are the potential environmental issues here? So I think just being aware of your state's regulations, because there's certain other states too that are just don't have anything like that, right? They're much lower regulation, and just the cost to get a building up is so much lower. So I think it's just consulting the right folks to know what to expect.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of stakeholder management there. Oh, go ahead, David.
Oh, Evan mentioned a great thing is, and part of it, we was talking about is like due diligence, right? And so like this isn't so much horror stories, but challenges where if we have a client and they already have a signed lease, or they've already bought the building they're planning on using for their grow, we walk in and we're like, oh my gosh, like this is not going to work, right? Ceiling heights can be too low. They may not have enough access to the power they need. They could have a number of infrastructure issues that can structural stability, drains, where a facility that may not be ready, it could be an extra $1 million, $2 million to get ready for actual cultivation, right? And a
It's a
big
lot of
chunk of
money.
that's in power, right? If you have a facility where you do some due diligence, and you say, oh, okay, well, great. This has the right ceiling heights. The roof is stable enough to take on these rooftop units. We have access to 6,000 amps of power, as much as we need. Great, that's a perfect building. But the due diligence is so important, because as you're doing your
Mhm.
pro forma and you're figuring out, okay, how much is this going to cost us to build out? If the building needs additional work to make it something that can be used for a cultivation facility, that can blow it out of the water, right? That can kill your budget. So those are the challenges. When we come in, Evan comes in, we do a checklist. I know we kind of work together and checking off, okay, does it the right heights? What's the power look like? What do we have interior drains? What's our roof structure like? And that can help save clients,
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars.
So this is a good segue to one of the questions we got from Max. Thanks for sending this in, which is, what is the number one mistake you see people make in cultivation facility design? And let's say indoor for
Mhm.
simplicity.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it kind of goes to number one, due diligence, right? Not doing the due diligence on the building before you sign the paperwork. And then also future proofing, right? Because nobody's going to start off maximizing their canopy size. When we say canopy, that we're talking about the actual flower rooms where the plants are growing, right? You have a lot of programming in a cultivation
Mm.
indoor grow. You're going to have your moms, you're going to have your veg room, you're going to have your trim, you're going to have your dry rooms, shipping, receiving, administrative, but the flower rooms, the canopy, that's where you're making your money, right? And a license will come with a certain canopy size. So let's say it's a 10,000 square foot canopy is allowed. Well, most clients will start with 5,000, 3,500 square feet of canopy, right? You start it and you grow into it. If you haven't future proofed the facility, now you're ready to maximize the canopy, but you pigeonholed yourself, right? Like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get extra rooms? We haven't thought ahead. We don't have a big enough irrigation room. We only have one dry room. So I would say it's a combination between due diligence and that future proofing.
All right. Very insightful. And then, yeah, same for Evan. What's the number one mistake you see people make in cultivation facility design?
I think the thing is too, right, for folks just starting out in that early design stage, just
Mhm.
acquiring a property, don't be afraid to engage somebody like David, right? That can help you look at the realistic costs of any upgrades you might have to do to the building. Because I think a lot of folks go in overly optimistic, let's say, or just aren't aware of what the issues could be.
Yeah.
And perhaps maybe there's a retainer or an hourly fee that you got to pay on the front end, but I can more than promise that it'll make up on the back end to ensure that you get the right building.
Yeah,
Um,
getting that expert input can save a lot of let me rephrase that. Getting the expert input can save you a lot of dollars later on,
And headaches.
and headaches.
right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And two, I mean, and this is, I think David was hinting at this, how do you phase out the project? You probably want to draw at least a schematic or a concept plan of what's this going to look like when we get it to the final stage, let's say 3 to 5 years down the road, right? What's the end product? So you can make sure you're sizing those support spaces. You have the dry rooms, the trim rooms, etc., to support the final overall canopy that you'll achieve at the final stages, the final phase of build out. And that's where each of us have expertise, right? I mean, my background is primarily architecture. Everything I'm frankly was through working in this industry the last 7 years. I mean, typical architectural firms, you're not really touching that to the degree you do in this specialty um, design work, right? So I also say don't be afraid to engage all the consultants you need. I mean, we still often bring in a specific cultivation consultant person for each job just to, go over our plan. Like, does this make sense for the
Mm-hmm.
SOPs? Have we allotted the right ratio of flowering to dry space, veg to flower, et cetera? So I, I always say, measure twice, cut once. It's the
Yeah.
classic rule. So,
No, that's great because there's so much turnover in the industry as far as directors of operation, right, and head growers, that you want to design it so that anybody can really plug and play, right? You maybe work with a client and in 6 months their head growers moved on, and they brought somebody else in. You don't want them to like, wait, why'd you set it up like this, and like, oh well, that's what their grower told us. No, we want to do it based on our experience and really plug and play so anybody can jump in there, right, and get into the facility.
So I see some reactions in the chat, some thumbs up, some applause emojis. So you guys are getting some good feedback here. So thank you guys for using those. Please continue. Love to see the engagement. All right. So let's move on now. I mean, in the beginning, we had a question about standards, but let's talk about, regulations. How do you actually practically go about executing cannabis facilities and operations? Like, what do inspections look like? So let's maybe
Mm.
dig into that a little bit.
Every state is different, right? Every state is different. You give a state like Illinois where you have to have an inspection before you even start, right? They want to look at the facility before you even submit the plans. Then you submit the plans. They're going to review the plans. They're going to make their changes. And this again, it's on the state level. Then a set will go to the state police. So you have so many levels, and inspections look. By the time you get to inspections in Illinois, it's actually very smooth because they had so many layers that they've looked at, right?
Mhm.
Um, but then you have other states, where maybe the first time they're coming in is the first time they've seen the plan and they've seen the layout. So you really, there may be things. Again, it's all about doing your homework, right? And what we like to do is make sure we've over right so like if we know, okay, we need 100% surveillance in this state, indoor and outdoor, we're going to add a couple extra cameras just to make sure, right? Just to cover it's going to be safer than sorry. Every client wants to be first to market, so you want to make sure that when you hit those inspections, they're not going to say, oh well, you guys have a few deficiencies, we'll come back in a month. That's like the worst thing
Mhm.
that could possibly happen. But again, it's so hard to kind of give an exact answer because every state is so different. Again, I mentioned Montana earlier. We called them. Our facility was ready. They said, "Okay, we'll come by in a few months." Like, what do you mean a few months? Like, no, your client can start. They can start operating, but we'll come by in a few months, check it all out. But they're good to go. They didn't even come out to look at it till a few months later. They wanted to see it operating. Other states, that's a no go, right? They can't bring a single plant in there until all inspections are in, certificate of occupancy. So, yeah, I mean, it's very different from state to state, and that's part of the challenge, but that's also part of the fun of it. Is being in an industry like this where you're constantly having to think and move and adapt.
Okay. Very good.
Not a great clear answer, but because there's no clear answer in our
Yeah.
industry. So,
Yeah, it's like, well, it's all different,
hmm
which makes it ever more challenging. So we are getting some questions popping in as you're saying all of that, David. So I'll share one here from David. So thanks for sending this in. As part of the planning process when building out a facility, do operators think ahead in engaging an engineer to do a cost segregation study? Interesting question.
interesting question. I have not seen it. In my experience, operators, really kind of just look at what's in front of them in the next, like whatever's the next milestone. Um, so it's always a good idea, right, to engage an engineer for cost segregation study or an engineer. I mean, a lot of times we like to bring in as many people as possible in the outset of the project.
Mhm.
Even the fertigation designer on day one, that you may not need for a few months down the line. But no, I'd say no. We have not seen operators think ahead on that.
Okay. Evan, anything from your perspective?
Not specifically on cost segregation, but yeah, I mean, I disagree with David. The earlier you can bring folks in, the better. I don't think there's any loss outside of perhaps some additional fees, but can more than promise you'll make up for that.
Yeah,
Um,
kind of gets towards more of like an integrated project delivery type of.
Yeah, I mean, if you can on day one at the table have your fertigation designer, your security team, your automation team, everybody, obviously, goes off saying the MEP team, right? Your engineers, your architect, your everybody at that table, and then you're also bouncing answers back and forth and questions, and you're grilling the operator, and you're really, I use the word dial in. You're really dialing in the project before you've even really gotten through much throughout the plan. And so then when the plan is done, it is perfect, right? And you take it out to bid, and you may still get RFIs, those are requests for information from
Yep.
subs and from vendors, but you have the answer for everything, right? You're not waiting like a few days to get answers back. Oh shoot, we still have to check with fertigation. What does that look like? What are the size of the tanks? You have it all in front of you already. We try to compile as much information as possible, right? We even have a grower checklist, right, of what's the methodology, what they plan on growing, how are they doing it. We try to get as much information as possible. But again, the more people at the table, the better. But like Evan said, there could be fees associated with that. And a lot of operators, they're running very lean, and they may not have access,
Mm,
to pay those consulting fees.
okay. All right. So, anything to add there, Evan? Were you gonna
yeah, just a
chime in?
quick one, and
Yeah.
this is something that yeah, David and I think have really, it's been a fruitful, productive approach here. We've a lot of projects in the last 6 to 12 months. A client will come to us, maybe contract is not even in the conversation yet, but they just
Hmm.
want to get a high level budget of what's this going to cost to build. And we've got David, he's got so much data from past projects, right? I mean, he can take
Yes.
all that and in a way that's comprehensive, line by line. Here's what you can generally expect cost wise for a facility of this size in this market with this labor price. Um, what else is huge for us too is being able to make some of these high level systems decisions as early as possible. So, what kind of HVAC system are we using? Is it going to be a VRF type, or is it going to
Yeah.
be a more traditional package units? Because there's no sense in us doing a full, complete HVAC MEP design. Turns out all that we're going to go with a completely different system. So that's
Yeah.
just a waste. It's a lose lose. We'd rather make that high level
Hmm.
decision than be confident about what we're putting on the page.
And
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 you
that's a great
mentioned.
point.
Oh, go ahead, David. Yeah.
I was just going to say
Yeah.
HVAC is huge, right? Because that's really the lifeblood of how that facility is gonna operate. Sometimes the building dictates, right? We've had buildings where you can only put in a VRF or a mini split type of system because you have zero lot line and you have no ability to put on the roof. Other times you may have a fantastic building where yes, let's put an integrated rooftop unit on that has dehum integrated into it, and it's going to be a lower price point. And then other times, clients may say, well, what do you guys think? Right. And then we'll do a quick exercise. We'll usually go chiller, VRF, standard integrated RTU type system and give them the pros and cons of each one. But like Evan says, you can't go too far down with the design until you know what type of HVAC system you're putting in.
Yeah.
And that's so important. And that's sometimes the trickiest part.
So I've two things. Evan, you mentioned the word data, and that like sparked something in my brain where I was like, yeah, data is the new oil, as they say. With all of the historical experience that you guys have had going through all of these processes, not just over and over again, but over and over again in different states. That is just a wealth of knowledge to help make informed decisions to help make the projects more predictable, as you were saying, David, like less time for RFIs,
Hmm.
exactly, or, close to exactly what's going to happen. Right. So yeah, that data piece is so crucial. And then where we left off with, talking about like the design requirements, we do have another question here from Andrew. So thanks for sending this in. Are the design teams taking serviceability of equipment into consideration? So that kind of ties right into that discussion there.
Hmm.
When we look at that, we look at redundancy, right? So as serviceability, I assume, how often equipment needs to be serviced. Is that, more of the question as far as what is, because these units, they go through the ringer, right?
Uh-huh.
And the biggest fear is if they're breaking down, are you still going to get them to work, right? And so a lot of our clients want redundancy. So if one of the units breaks down and the dehume's out, do we have redundancy there to pick it up? Do a second dehumidification system, or is there built-in redundancy? I believe that's probably the question because that's something we definitely all look at. Or are they talking about serviceability of the equipment, like how easily it can be serviced and maintained?
Mm.
Again, that definitely all gets looked at because you want these to be super efficient for the employees or for any type of um, if a system goes down or if a system's not working right, you definitely need to know that you can easily service the equipment. When Evan's designing it, I assume he could speak to this. He places them in locations where they can be serviced easily. I think that's the question that's being asked. I assume so.
I would interpret it that way, but
Yeah.
Andrew, feel free to chat if otherwise. Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Um, oh, yeah, go ahead, Evan. Do you have a thought there?
Well, I mean, serviceability. So one thing I think about is, you know, in the true sense, our responsibilities are for the code compliance of the design, right? The constructability, code compliance. SOPs is its own other bucket, right? Standard operating
Hmm.
procedures, and that's where I think some of these things around serviceability, access, let's say, come into play. But still, I mean, things such as where do you place electrical panels, right? I mean, a lot of folks go with a centralized electrical room. Oftentimes, you're going to have a number of sub panels. Um, let's say you have 6 to 10 flower rooms, or even more. I mean, perhaps you have a dedicated panel for each one that's has all the lighting and HVAC specific to that room. Instead of consolidating that all to one electrical room, sometimes it's nice to put the panel right next to the door,
Hmm.
so it's all consolidated right there, and that's only the electrical, only the breakers for that flower room, for that bedroom. Um,
And just a quick note here. So we do have clarification from Andrew. So equipment that's easy to access and designed to fit where it can be easily reached and serviced. So that was the throwback to the
Or
clarification.
easily reach the service. Yeah, that definitely gets taken into account. Absolutely, that's very important because the equipment always needs to be tweaked or serviced.
Okay, awesome. All right, so this is really good. We're getting a lot of engagement. Thank you all for sending these in. So another question here. So I know we have a couple more topics, but I do want to at least try to get to what the discussion is here. So from David, so similar to what is going on in New York right now, but have you run into situations where, say, a dispensary starts a build out and then they have issues with proximity? And from your reaction, David, I can see there's some
Well,
experience there.
well, New York is a mess. I don't know if you've heard. I think I may have told you a little bit about this. That they sent notices to 60 operating dispensaries that they have to relocate. And those dispensaries got their information and their direction from the state agency, from the OCM, Office of Cannabis Management. So it's a big fight going on in New York right now. But what I was kind of smiling at is because I kind of told that story earlier where we did that proximity issue in downtown Chicago on Michigan Avenue where we were within our zone. I think we still had about 50, 60 feet of buffer, even aside from where it had to be 500 feet or so. I think we're 550, 560. Even though we were in that buffer, again, Archdiocese of Chicago, a bunch of parents, wrote letters and they would not let the project move forward. So yes, and that was a project that they weren't operating, but they probably spent over $100,000 in design fees and pre-construction and preliminary demo, and the project got killed. So yeah, it happens. That's why I always say,
It's
the zoning attorney in me always says, you know,
yeah,
due diligence, due diligence, due diligence. Talk to the neighbors, community outreach. Just make sure everybody's got their warm and fuzzies.
warm and fuzzies. It's
Warm and
important.
fuzzies. Yep.
Yeah, can make or break the project.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks for sending that in, David. I
Yeah.
think the
Thank you.
lesson here is like, yeah, make sure you get your warm and fuzzies first before you go in. All right. So we might have lost Evan. Maybe he's popping back in. But I did want to circle back to a question that came up much earlier in the discussion from Rex, and I'm not sure exactly what this means, but maybe you guys will.
Hmm.
So how will 280E impact the industry under rescheduling?
Yep. So what Rex is talking about is right now cannabis operators, and specifically, really, this hurts the retailers. They cannot deduct their business expenses, right? So you think about a regular retailer, a regular business, they really, they're deducting left and right. A cannabis operator cannot, and that's really hurting a lot of operators. They're breaking even or they're barely making margin. Um, the hope is that rescheduling from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 will allow them to take tax deductions. And 280E is the part of the tax code that refers to. So that
Okay.
is the hope. It's not going to open up banking, right? I mean, it's not going to create an automatic safe banking act that's going to allow businesses like mine as well. I have to bank in a special bank, to get business loans through, BMO or Bank of America, whatever. That's not going to happen with rescheduling. But what rescheduling will do is it's going to open up for federal medical research on cannabis,
Well,
and it will allow businesses to actually deduct expenses.
okay. Wow, this is getting really deep. All right. Which ties into another comment that just came in from Indira. We do cannabis banking, and folks are having major issues with finding stores to rent because of
Hmm.
zoning.
Yep.
So, yeah, a lot of
Well,
experiences with all this stuff from different sectors. This is really interesting.
and we see this all the time, and this is kind of where my zoning background helps. But so you may or may not know, but like in a state, when a state goes legal, right, say, okay, we're going to have legal cannabis, they leave it up to the local townships, counties, the towns to opt in or opt out, right?
Hmm.
So for instance, New Jersey, I think 70% of the townships did not opt in to allow a cannabis facility. So now that leaves you scrambling with the final 30%. So you may have some towns that have, 4 or 5 dispensaries in a little town because it won't allow any in the town over. So it's very hard to find stores, especially on the East Coast, to rent out because of zoning. In an area where, they'll say, well, Minnesota's a good example. I think almost every county has, you hear that feedback? I mean,
Yeah, there's
okay.
a little bit of
Uh,
audio issues that we're
um,
fighting through here, so bear with us on the feed, everybody.
but
And it
on
looks like we may have lost Evan, but anyway, try to finish
he'll
that
be
thought,
back.
David. Yeah.
Let's say in a state like Minnesota, where almost all the towns and counties have opted
Mhm.
in, it's much easier. Again, once a landlord knows that it's going to be cannabis, they think that there's a we call it the green tax, right? They're going to charge a little bit more because it's cannabis. They think everyone in cannabis is making money hand over foot, which is not the case. But the zoning and the lack of areas to rent is twofold. It's one is not all towns or counties have opted in to allow cannabis, and then number two, the ones that have a very small area that they allow it in, right? They call it a green overlay zone. You have to get a special use permit for it. So, if you're looking at like a pie, the slice of pie that is allowable for a cannabis facility is very, very thin. And I think it's going to be like that at least for a little bit longer until things open up in more states and people realize it's normal. It's just like having a liquor store or a bar, not a big deal. But that is, I think, for the near future, at least it'll be like that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's see. I'm going to take one last question here, just because we're getting towards the end of our time. But also for the audience, please, if you have any questions that come up after the fact,
Please.
feel free to drop it in. We'll see it. We will be able to get back to you, just not during this live discussion. So please do use that comment chat box. And then I'll pull up one of our last questions here from Andrew. So this is maybe a little bit more technical and maybe we'll get Evan back or not. We'll see if he can pop on for the end here. So referring to HVAC, why would an
Hmm.
RTU with an economizer be designed and specified in the drawings when typically speaking, operators don't want to use outside air?
I will let, yeah, if Evan pops in, on the design point, I'll let him answer that. It's a little bit more technical, but I will say that when we're looking at HVAC as a whole, we're looking at as options on efficiency, options on maintenance, options on what is the monthly going to be as far as the cost, and also what's the upfront cost going to be. So many things get looked into when it comes to HVAC. There's I'd say a majority of thinking people don't want to use a mini split system. You
Mhm.
need many, but we have a lot of growers like, you know what, this is all I can afford right now. I'll make it work. Great. So it's really specific on the operator, what's their budget, and if an RTU with an economizer is designed and spec'd in the drawings, bringing in outside air, it I'm sure that there's a reason for not something that we usually would design. But again, we're not on the MEP side of it, but others, Ivan, he could probably answer a little bit better. But
Yeah,
again, it's very operator specific as far as what type of HVAC system. But Evan, can you see the question on there?
Yeah, yeah. Is my audio okay?
yeah, you're doing better. Yeah.
For some reason, I can only hear David though. It's strange.
Ah, okay.
Uh oh. Uh oh.
Yeah, but I understand the premise of the question though for sure. I mean, because you kind of got two things in conflict, right? I
Oh,
mean,
I don't
typically
know.
you want to bring
I don't know. I
outside
can't
air
really.
from a code perspective, and from
it
a
just went out. Oh man,
yeah.
Evan. Um, try one more time saying something. Okay. Well, I don't know if he can hear me. Maybe you sound like a robot a little bit, Evan.
Yeah.
So it's all right. Well, we can answer the question afterwards, and he'll. Looks like maybe his connection is a little unstable there, but anyway, so we'll get him back in hopefully for the very closing comments here. So I do see that we're getting close to time. Some of us are maybe dropping off. I do want to give us enough time to close out and maybe get to our next meeting or something. So I'll just start with David. You've shared a lot of information. I can tell there's a wealth of history and knowledge that you have specifically in this niche, which is really cool to see. We don't often talk about cannabis facility design in AEC, and I'm not sure why, because it's pulling all the elements from all the different types of buildings into one, which is to me really fascinating. So thank you for sharing your time, your insights, and all
So
that
thank you.
you've been working on. I do want to give you a chance. So if anybody wants to follow up directly with you, or just wants to learn more or connect with you in some way, what's the best way that they can do that?
Easy. Email David at growamericabuilders.com. Or if you go to our website, which is growamericabuilders.com, my cell phone is literally the number on the website. So
Wow.
you go to the website, you can text me, call me. I try to, be totally available at all times. It's a 24/7 business. So feel free to reach out either way.
All right. Excellent. And then let's maybe see if we can get Evan back.
Uh,
Hopefully, fingers
you know what?
crossed, it
I will
works.
give out Evan's information. I have his number
Yeah.
up here. Oh, there he is.
Oh, we
Okay.
can hear you.
So
Great.
Yeah.
is the audio better?
Loud and clear. Yeah. Feel
Okay.
free. Again, Evan, same for you. Thank you for sharing your time here with us. Clearly, a lot of expertise and knowledge in a very niche space. Maybe not very niche, but niche space. Yeah, that we should maybe talk a little bit more about. So yeah, let the audience know, where can they find you or follow up if they want to connect.
Yeah, and I appreciate you setting this up, Aaron. So our main company website is just studioblisssla.com. Um, we're not LA specific. We, like I said, worked in 20 states, but that was our home base, and I've been primarily in New York for about a year now. So we're very heavy on our East Coast projects. But check out our website. You can shoot me an email, Evan at Studio Bliss LA. And yeah, similar to David, we got the bat phone. Call me anytime. I want to be a resource.
Awesome. So, last closing comments here. Thank you to the audience for joining and for being really engaged. This was an amazing discussion. It's still going to be open if you guys have any questions or comments after the fact, or maybe think about something overnight. Oh, hey, I want to ask about this. You
Please.
can always use that comment box or chat box, or reach out to one of these guys directly, which I would recommend. But also, this event is recorded on this page on LinkedIn as well as YouTube, so you can come back to it if there's something else that you want to, take a look at or ask about. So thank you all for tuning in. Appreciate your time. And I look forward to hosting the next session. So stay tuned for more. Thank you all.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.